You've been lied to about weight loss. Not directly, not intentionally, but in a way that has convinced millions of people to blame themselves, while the real problem grows silently inside them every single day. Because if you are eating less, exercising more, trying to be healthy, and your belly still won't shrink, your energy still crashes after meals, and your blood sugar keeps creeping upward, then the issue may not be your discipline at all. The real enemy could be something far more dangerous. A type of fat you cannot see. Right now, as you watch this, there may be fat wrapped around your liver, packed deep behind your abdominal wall, pressing against your pancreas, interfering with your hormones, and flooding your bloodstream with inflammatory chemicals every hour of the day. And here's the frightening part. You do not need to look overweight for this to happen. Scientists now use a term that sounds almost unbelievable. Thin outside, fat inside. In medical research, it describes people who appear completely normal externally while carrying dangerous amounts of visceral fat internally. Some studies estimate this condition affects nearly 40% of adults who believe they are metabolically healthy. That means you can fit into normal clothes, receive compliments about your weight, and still be developing insulin resistance, fatty liver disease, or prediabetes underneath the surface. This is why so many people feel confused. They think they're doing everything correctly, but their biology is working against them. And what most people never realize is that visceral fat behaves very differently from the soft fat underneath your skin. This fat is biologically active. It communicates with your organs. It changes your metabolism. It disrupts insulin signaling. And over time, it slowly pushes your body toward chronic disease. But there's another side to this story that almost nobody talks about. Because after years of studying metabolic dysfunction, and watching patients struggle with stubborn abdominal fat, researchers uncovered something remarkable. One specific fruit, something simple, affordable, and available in almost every grocery store, appears to directly target several of the biological pathways connected to visceral fat accumulation and insulin resistance, not through gimmicks, not through starvation diets, not through dangerous fat-burning supplements, but through naturally occurring compounds that interact with your cells at the molecular level. And what shocked researchers most was how quickly some of these mechanisms began responding. Within days, inflammation markers started shifting. Within weeks, insulin sensitivity improved. And over time, deep abdominal fat deposits began shrinking. That changes everything. Because most people believe insulin resistance is permanent. They think once metabolism becomes damaged, the decline is inevitable. They assume aging automatically means weight gain, fatigue, blood sugar problems, and increasing waistlines. But modern metabolic research tells a very different story. Your metabolism is not broken beyond repair. Your body is constantly responding to signals. And when you give it the right signals consistently, powerful changes can begin happening beneath the surface. I became fascinated by this after seeing the same pattern repeatedly. Patients would arrive exhausted, inflamed, struggling with stubborn weight gain, elevated glucose levels, and growing abdominal fat despite trying harder and harder to control calories. Some exercised constantly. Others followed restrictive diets. Yet their bodies still resisted change. That forced researchers to ask a deeper question. What if the issue isn't simply how much people eat? What if the problem is how their fat cells and liver cells are functioning internally? Because inside the body, there's a metabolic process that determines whether fat gets stored or burned, whether inflammation escalates or calms down, whether cells respond properly to insulin or begin ignoring it, and certain natural compounds appear capable of influencing those switches directly. Most people unknowingly keep those switches turned off every day through processed food, blood sugar spikes, chronic stress, and inflammatory eating patterns. But the fruit we're about to discuss seems to help turn them back on. Before I reveal exactly how this works, you need to understand what visceral fat actually does inside the body. Because once you see the process clearly, you'll understand why ordinary dieting often fails to remove it. Most people picture body fat as the layer sitting under the skin, the fat you can pinch around your waist or thighs. That's called subcutaneous fat. Visceral fat is completely different. Imagine your abdominal cavity like a tightly packed control room filled with critical machinery: your liver, your intestines, your pancreas, your kidneys, every organ working together to regulate blood sugar, hormones, detoxification, digestion, and energy production. Now imagine thick insulation slowly expanding around every machine inside that room. At first, everything still works. But over time, pressure builds. Signals become distorted. Ventilation slows down. Inflammation rises. And eventually the entire system starts malfunctioning. That's exactly what visceral fat does. It doesn't just sit there passively storing calories. It actively releases inflammatory compounds directly into the bloodstream. Those inflammatory signals travel straight to the liver, where they begin interfering with insulin communication. And once the liver starts resisting insulin, blood sugar regulation becomes harder and harder. This is where metabolic disease quietly begins in millions of people. Not overnight, not dramatically, but slowly, silently, year after year. And the most dangerous part is that many people don't realize it's happening until symptoms become impossible to ignore. But what researchers discovered next may completely change how people think about food, fat loss, and metabolic recovery. Because one fruit contains a rare combination of compounds that appear uniquely suited to interrupt this destructive cycle at multiple levels simultaneously. The fruit researchers became obsessed with was not an exotic superfood from a remote jungle. It wasn't hidden behind a paywall, locked inside an expensive supplement, or promoted through some miracle weight loss program. It was the avocado. And what scientists discovered about it completely challenged the old belief that eating fat automatically makes you fat. Because when researchers began analyzing avocados at the cellular level, they realized this fruit behaves less like a simple food and more like a metabolic regulator. Inside an avocado are compounds capable of influencing inflammation, insulin sensitivity, fat oxidation, gut bacteria, and even mitochondrial energy production all at the same time. That's what makes it different. Most foods affect one pathway. Avocado appears to affect several of the exact systems involved in visceral fat accumulation simultaneously. And that's why researchers started paying attention. One of the most important discoveries came when scientists examined how avocado consumption affected deep abdominal fat specifically. Not total body weight, not water retention, not temporary scale changes, but visceral fat itself. In one controlled clinical trial, adults with excess abdominal fat were instructed to eat one avocado every day for several weeks, while researchers tracked changes using advanced body composition imaging. What they found surprised even the investigators. Participants consuming avocado showed measurable reductions in visceral fat compared to the control group. Not just superficial weight loss, internal fat reduction. That distinction matters enormously because visceral fat is the dangerous fat linked to insulin resistance, inflammation, fatty liver disease, cardiovascular problems, and accelerated aging. And what made the results even more compelling was that calorie intake remained similar between groups. This suggested something deeper was happening biologically. Researchers began asking a critical question. What exactly is avocado doing inside the body that makes it uniquely effective against visceral fat? The answer starts with a powerful compound called oleic acid. Avocados are loaded with monounsaturated fats, especially oleic acid, and this particular fat behaves very differently from the inflammatory oils found in processed foods. Inside your liver and fat cells exists something called PPAR alpha. Think of it as a master metabolic switch. When this switch remains inactive, your body becomes more likely to store fat, especially around the abdomen. Fat oxidation slows down. Energy production becomes inefficient. Inflammation rises. But when PPAR alpha becomes activated, your metabolism shifts toward burning stored fat more efficiently for fuel. And oleic acid appears to activate this pathway remarkably well. This is one reason Mediterranean-style diets rich in monounsaturated fats are repeatedly associated with lower rates of metabolic disease. Your cells literally begin changing their fuel preference. Instead of constantly storing energy, they become more willing to access stored fat reserves, especially visceral fat. But that's only the beginning. Because avocados also contain an extraordinary amount of soluble fiber, And this is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Most people think fiber only matters for digestion. In reality, certain types of fiber directly influence metabolic health through the gut microbiome. Inside your digestive tract live trillions of bacteria, and some of these bacteria produce compounds that dramatically affect inflammation and insulin sensitivity throughout the body. When you consume soluble fiber, beneficial gut bacteria fermented into substances called short-chain fatty acids. Two of the most important are butyrate and propionate. These compounds travel from the gut directly to the liver, where they help calm inflammation and improve insulin signaling. Remember what we discussed earlier. Visceral fat floods the liver with inflammatory signals. Butyrate appears to help interrupt that process. It quiets the metabolic chaos. It helps the liver, insulin properly again. And researchers noticed that avocado consumption significantly increased populations of beneficial bacteria associated with butyrate production. That means avocado wasn't just affecting fat cells directly. It was changing the gut environment itself. And when the gut changes, metabolism changes. This is one reason some people suddenly notice more stable energy, fewer cravings, and better blood sugar control after consistently improving their diet. The gut and the liver are constantly communicating. If one becomes inflamed, the other suffers. But when both begin functioning properly again, the body starts recovering far faster than most people realize. Then researchers discovered something even more shocking. Avocados contain a rare compound called avocatin B, and unlike fiber or healthy fats, avocatin B exists in very few foods on Earth. Scientists studying metabolic dysfunction found that this compound appears to influence energy production inside the mitochondria, the tiny structures inside cells responsible for generating fuel. Here's why that matters. In insulin resistance, cells often become overloaded with toxic metabolic byproducts that interfere with normal glucose uptake. Essentially, the communication system becomes jammed. Sugar remains trapped in the bloodstream instead of entering cells efficiently. Over time, the pancreas produces more and more insulin trying to compensate. That cycle drives weight gain, inflammation, fatigue, and eventually prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. But laboratory research found that avocatin B helped reduce some of those toxic metabolic disruptions. In muscle cells, glucose uptake improved significantly. Cells became more responsive again. Imagine cleaning static from a radio signal. That's essentially what researchers believe may be happening metabolically. The signal becomes clearer. Cells function more normally. Energy production improves. And once cells regain insulin sensitivity, the body becomes far more capable of mobilizing stored fat. But avocado contains another powerful weapon most people have never heard about. Lutein. Usually marketed for eye health. Lutein is actually a potent anti-inflammatory compound that influences one of the body's most important inflammatory control systems, NF-κB. NF-κB acts like a master switch for inflammation. When it stays chronically activated, the body produces more inflammatory molecules linked to insulin resistance and visceral fat accumulation. Lutein appears capable of helping suppress that inflammatory cascade. And this matters because inflammation and visceral fat feed each other in a vicious cycle. More visceral fat creates more inflammation. More inflammation encourages more visceral fat storage. Breaking that cycle is one of the keys to restoring metabolic health. This is why people often fail when they focus only on calories. Calories matter, yes. But metabolism is also controlled by hormones, inflammation, cellular signaling, mitochondrial function, gut bacteria, and nutrient quality. Your body is not a simple calculator. It's a biological communication network, and certain foods send very powerful signals. That's why avocado continues attracting so much scientific attention. Not because it's trendy, but because it appears to influence multiple root causes of metabolic dysfunction simultaneously. For years, people were told the same frustrating message. Eat less. Move more. Count calories. And if the weight around your stomach refused to disappear, the assumption was simple: you lacked discipline. But the deeper researchers investigated visceral fat, the more they realized something uncomfortable. Human metabolism is far more complex than a basic calorie equation. Because two people can eat similar amounts of food, exercise similar amounts, and still experience completely different metabolic outcomes depending on what is happening inside their cells. That's why the avocado research became so important. For the first time, scientists began documenting measurable changes in visceral fat, insulin sensitivity, and inflammatory signaling connected to one specific whole food intervention. And the results forced many researchers to rethink what metabolic recovery actually looks like. One of the most discussed studies came from researchers studying adults with excess abdominal fat over a controlled intervention period. Participants were divided into groups. One group added a full avocado daily to their routine. The other maintained a comparable eating structure without avocado. But here's what made this study powerful. Researchers didn't rely on bathroom scales. They used advanced body composition imaging to examine internal fat distribution directly. Because scales can be deceptive. A person can lose water weight while remaining metabolically unhealthy. Another person can improve insulin sensitivity, reduce inflammation, and shrink visceral fat while the scale barely changes at all. That's why imaging matters. And when researchers analyzed the results, they discovered something striking. The avocado group showed measurable reductions in visceral fat accumulation, especially around the abdominal region associated with metabolic dysfunction. Meanwhile, the control group showed far less improvement. And perhaps most importantly, these changes occurred without extreme dieting. This wasn't starvation. It wasn't an exhausting bootcamp program. It was a targeted nutritional intervention affecting metabolic pathways beneath the surface. That distinction changes how we should think about fat loss entirely. Because the body is not simply trying to burn calories. The body is constantly responding to hormonal and inflammatory signals. If those signals improve, metabolism improves. If those signals remain dysfunctional, fat storage becomes easier no matter how hard someone tries. Another major clinical investigation focused specifically on adults with metabolic syndrome. The dangerous combination of elevated blood sugar, excess abdominal fat, abnormal cholesterol, and rising triglycerides. This condition now affects millions of adults worldwide, often silently progressing for years before symptoms become severe. Researchers wanted to know whether daily avocado intake could influence insulin resistance markers directly. And the results again surprised investigators. Participants showed meaningful improvements in fasting insulin levels along with measurable improvements in insulin sensitivity scores used clinically to assess metabolic health. Think about what that means. The body wasn't simply losing weight. Cells were responding to insulin more effectively again. That's the real goal, because insulin resistance sits at the center of so many modern diseases. When insulin signaling becomes impaired, blood sugar regulation deteriorates. Fat storage increases. Energy crashes become more common. Hunger intensifies. Inflammation rises. And eventually the body becomes trapped in a vicious metabolic cycle. But when insulin sensitivity improves, everything begins shifting in the opposite direction. Energy stabilizes. Fat burning improves. Cravings decrease. Inflammation lowers. And abdominal fat becomes easier to mobilize. That's why these studies matter so much. They suggest metabolic dysfunction may be far more reversible than most people believe. Then came one of the most fascinating discoveries of all. Researchers studying Avocado B, the rare compound found in avocados, noticed something unusual in human muscle cells. The compound appeared to help restore glucose uptake inside metabolically dysfunctional cells. In simple terms, cells started responding to fuel more normally again. This matters because insulin resistance is partially a communication problem. The body produces insulin, but cells stop listening efficiently. Imagine knocking on a locked door repeatedly. The pancreas keeps knocking harder by releasing more insulin. But the cells remain resistant. Over time, that constant strain damages metabolic health. What Avocado B appeared to do was help reduce some of the metabolic interference disrupting that communication. Researchers observed improvements in mitochondrial efficiency and glucose handling inside cells exposed to the compound. And mitochondria are critically important because they control energy production itself. When mitochondria function poorly, the body becomes metabolically sluggish. Fat oxidation declines. Energy systems are struggling. But the research didn't stop there. Scientists also began examining how avocado affected the gut microbiome over time. And what they discovered reinforced something many metabolic researchers now strongly believe: your gut bacteria influence far more than digestion. They influence inflammation, blood sugar regulation, hunger hormones, fat storage, and even immune signaling. In one investigation, participants consuming avocado daily showed increases in beneficial bacterial strains associated with lower inflammation and improved gut barrier function. Why is that important? Because an unhealthy gut can leak inflammatory compounds into the bloodstream, worsening insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction. But when beneficial bacteria flourish, they produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate that help calm inflammation and improve communication between the gut and liver. The gut-liver connection is one of the most powerful systems in metabolic health, and researchers increasingly believe repairing this connection may be essential for reversing visceral fat accumulation long-term. This is why quick-fix dieting so often fails. Crash diets might temporarily reduce scale weight, but they rarely repair the biological systems driving fat storage in the first place. That requires deeper metabolic healing, and according to the evidence, avocado appears to support several of those repair pathways simultaneously. But there's something extremely important most people misunderstand. Eating avocado occasionally is not the same as following a structured metabolic protocol. Researchers didn't observe these changes from random bites here and there. The effects came from consistency, daily intake, repeated biological signaling. That's how the body changes. Not through perfection, through repetition. By now, you understand something most people never learn. Visceral fat is not just extra weight. It's biologically active tissue that interferes with insulin signaling, drives inflammation, disrupts metabolism, and slowly pushes the body toward chronic disease. And you've also seen why avocado is attracting so much scientific attention. Not because it's trendy, but because it appears to influence multiple systems connected to fat storage and insulin resistance at the same time. Now comes the practical question. How do you actually use it correctly? Because this is where many people accidentally sabotage the benefits without realizing it. They eat tiny amounts. They combine it with sugary foods. They use it inconsistently. Or they expect dramatic changes on the scale within a few days and quit before the real metabolic improvements begin. That's why consistency and preparation matter enormously. Researchers studying these mechanisms repeatedly emphasize one key point: the body changes through repeated biological signals over time. So here's the foundational approach many metabolic specialists recommend when using avocado strategically for visceral fat reduction and insulin support. The first step is surprisingly simple. Consume one whole medium avocado every day, not a few slices, not a spoonful of guacamole once in a while. A full avocado. Most medium avocados contain a powerful combination of monounsaturated fats, fiber, lutein, potassium, and rare metabolic compounds in amounts large enough to influence biological pathways meaningfully. And here's something important most people misunderstand. You do not need to slash calories aggressively while doing this. In many clinical studies, avocado was added to the existing diet rather than replacing meals entirely. Why? Because the goal is not starvation. The goal is metabolic signaling. You are trying to improve how the body functions internally, not simply force temporary weight loss through deprivation. The second recommendation is to split the avocado across 2 meals. Half with your first major meal. Half with your largest meal of the day. This timing matters because avocado helps slow digestion, stabilize blood sugar responses, and reduce sharp insulin spikes after carbohydrate-heavy meals. Remember, insulin spikes are one of the major drivers keeping visceral fat locked in place. Every time blood sugar surges dramatically, the body receives another signal encouraging fat storage and inflammation. But pairing avocado with meals appears to soften those spikes significantly. That means steadier energy, fewer crashes, reduced cravings, and less metabolic stress throughout the day. The third step surprises many people. Add fresh lemon or lime juice directly onto the avocado. This isn't just for flavor. The acidic environment helps protect sensitive antioxidant compounds like lutein during digestion and may improve their bioavailability. In simple terms, your body absorbs and uses those compounds more effectively. And lutein matters far more than most people realize. It helps suppress inflammatory, signaling pathways associated with insulin resistance and abdominal fat accumulation. That's why this small detail becomes important. Tiny adjustments repeated daily create powerful long-term effects. Next comes another strategic addition, extra virgin olive oil. Just a small drizzle. Why combine healthy fat with another healthy fat? Because extra virgin olive oil contains anti-inflammatory compounds that appear to complement avocado's metabolic effects. Together, they support pathways connected to fat oxidation and inflammatory control simultaneously. Researchers studying Mediterranean dietary patterns repeatedly observe this synergy. Whole foods work together, and when the body receives multiple supportive signals at once, metabolic repair becomes easier. The next recommendation focuses on fiber diversity. Do not eat avocado alone every day. Pair it with high-fiber vegetables, legumes, leafy greens, or cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cabbage, or Brussels sprouts. Why? Because your gut bacteria require a variety of fibers to thrive. Remember, one of the major benefits of avocado comes from how it influences the gut microbiome. Beneficial bacteria ferment fiber into compounds that help calm inflammation and improve insulin sensitivity. But healthy bacteria need consistent nourishment. The more diverse the fiber intake, the stronger the microbial ecosystem becomes. And stronger gut health often translates into stronger metabolic health. This is one reason many people notice improved digestion, reduced bloating, and better appetite control after several days of eating this way consistently. Their gut environment is changing. Now here's something many people will be relieved to hear. Frozen avocado works too. A lot of people assume frozen foods lose all nutritional value, but properly frozen avocado retains most of its important compounds remarkably well. That means cost or convenience does not have to become an excuse. You can thaw it naturally and still receive many of the same metabolic benefits. Then comes one of the most overlooked strategies of all. Combining avocado with fat-soluble nutrients. Certain nutrients require dietary fat for optimal absorption. Avocado naturally provides that fat vehicle, so pairing it with foods like eggs, salmon, walnuts, or leafy greens may improve nutrient absorption even further. This creates a more supportive metabolic environment overall. And beginning around day 4, some experts recommend introducing another interesting addition: half a grapefruit in the morning. Now this is important. Grapefruit can interact with certain medications, so anyone taking prescriptions should speak with a healthcare professional first. But researchers became interested in grapefruit because it contains compounds associated with improved fat metabolism and reduced liver fat accumulation. Combined with avocado, this may create additional metabolic support through complementary pathways. Again, none of this is magic. It's biology. Repeated supportive signals over time. That's what changes the body. But there's something even more important you need to understand before starting this process. Your timeline for success must change. Most people are conditioned to obsess over the scale. They expect immediate weight drops. But visceral fat reduction often happens differently. In the early stages, the body may improve hydration, glycogen storage, inflammation levels, and insulin sensitivity before dramatic scale changes appear. That means your waistline, energy levels, cravings, sleep quality, and mental clarity may improve before your body weight changes substantially. And many people quit right before these deeper improvements begin accelerating. That's the tragedy. Because metabolic healing is happening underneath the surface long before it becomes obvious externally. Within several days, gut bacteria begin shifting. Within a few weeks, insulin signaling may improve measurably. And over longer periods, visceral fat itself may begin shrinking. But consistency is everything. Your body responds to repeated patterns, not occasional effort. And in the next part, I'm going to reveal the 4 biggest mistakes people make that completely destroy these benefits. Mistakes so common that most people are probably making at least 2 of them right now without realizing it. Once you understand these hidden metabolic traps, you'll finally see why healthy eating sometimes fails, and how to stop unintentionally working against your own biology.